The courtroom was still vibrating from the shock of Malachi's final revelation as Part I ended. But Part 2 opened with a chaos even thicker, because right after he spoke the name of the mysterious fourth man, federal agents burst through the side doors, whispering urgently to the judge, who looked increasingly alarmed as he glanced between the agents, the trembling defense team, and the 8-year-old child who had just appended the entire structure of their legal system with a single breath. And the judge knew he had no choice but to call an immediate recess as the courtroom erupted into a storm of voices, gasps, shouts, and frantic reporters trying to capture the moment through thick security glass. Malachi sat perfectly still, his hands folded, but his mother pulled him close with shaking arms, whispering prayers beneath her breath as federal marshals surrounded them, escorting them through a private hallway because the name he revealed Deputy Attorney General Runwell Hayes, not just another corrupt official, but one of the most powerful legal authorities in the entire state, a man with influence deep enough to bury investigations, erase records, intimidate witnesses, and manipulate outcomes like a puppet master tugging invisible strings from behind polished mahogany desks. And the fact that an 8-year-old boy had exposed him felt like a crack in the foundation of an entire building. A crack that if widened could bring everything crashing down. As they moved through the back corridors, Malachi's mother begged the marshals to keep him safe, her voice breaking, because she remembered the night the SUV followed them, the strange phone calls with breathing on the other end, the feeling of being watched even when the curtains were closed, and now all of that made sense. Those weren't random threats. Those were orders coming from the same man Malachi had just exposed. The lead marshal, a stern woman with sharp eyes, assured her that no harm would come to them on her watch. But even she looked rattled, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds, because exposing someone as powerful as Hayes put everyone in danger, especially the boy who had dared to speak the truth out loud. Reporters surged toward the courthouse side entrance as rumors spread like wildfire online. Hashtags trending, live streams exploding with views, political analysts scrambling to understand how a child had uncovered corruption on a scale seasoned investigators had missed. And outside, a storm gathered, gray clouds folding over one another, lightning flashing, as if the weather itself sensed that justice and danger were now wrestling in the heart of the city. Back inside, the judge held an emergency meeting with senior officials, their voices heated and frantic as they argued over the next steps. Some demanded proceedings pause for the boy's safety. Others insisted that continuing was necessary to preserve the integrity of the court. But one thing was clear to everyone: Malachi's testimony was no longer just a witness statement. It was the spark that had ignited a legal explosion they could not control. After 2 tense hours, the judge called for the courtroom to reconvene under heightened security marshals in every corner, metal detectors at each door, a bomb-sniffing dog pacing the hallway, and a new protocol requiring every attendee to surrender their phone. And when the jury filed back in, they looked nervous, clutching notebooks with tense hands. But their eyes constantly shifted toward the boy, as if silently asking how he remained so calm in the middle of such danger. And even the judge had trouble maintaining his stern expression as Malachi was escorted back to the witness stand. He climbed into the seat again, his feet dangling just like before, but his face carried a new seriousness, a weight that made the courtroom fall silent without a single instruction. And when the prosecutor asked him gently to continue his testimony, the defense attorney slammed his fist onto the table, shouting objections, insisting that the boy's story was fabricated, that no child could possibly recall events with such clarity. But Malachi simply leaned closer to the microphone and began to speak with the same steady, precise voice that had shaken the entire institution. He explained that Hayes wasn't just present that night, he was the mastermind behind everything, using Draper to funnel public grant money into shell charities, then siphoning millions into private accounts overseas. And when auditors got too close to discovering discrepancies, Hayes ordered the destruction of multiple records, including the files stored in Draper's warehouse, which led to the heated argument Malachi overheard. The jury leaned forward as the boy detailed how Hayes instructed Knox to intimidate or remove anyone who asked too many questions, including a retired accountant who had recently disappeared and who was missing. Person's report had been buried in paperwork by a clerk working under Hayes' supervision. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as Malachi recited exact words spoken that night. Fragments like "handle the witness," "audit comes in 10 days," "burn everything before sunrise," delivered with an eerie calm that made the air heavy. And even the judge found himself gripping his chair's armrest as Malachi explained how Knox had used coded language to refer to threats, calling them cold dinners, and how Draper had protested that the threats were growing too risky, only for Hayes to say coldly, "Loose ends have to be tied," a phrase Malachi repeated now, his voice echoing across the courtroom like a haunting prophecy returning. The defense attorney grew desperate, throwing accusations, trying to paint Malachi as confused or coached, but every time he tried to twist the narrative, the child corrected him with factual clarity, citing dates, times, and statements so exact, the attorney eventually stumbled over his own words, sweat dripping down his forehead as the jury glared at him with dawning disgust. Malachi continued describing how the days following the meeting were filled with strange sightings. the SUV with tinted windows parked outside their apartment, the man in the hallway who pretended to be delivering mail but had no packages, the anonymous envelope slipped under their door that contained only one sentence: children should mind their own business. All of which his mother reported to police, only to have the cases mysteriously closed without explanation, something that made perfect sense now that they knew Hayes held influence over multiple precincts. The courtroom's energy shifted from shock to outrage as the puzzle pieces snapped together, and the prosecutor began presenting newly uncovered evidence: financial records, phone logs, suspicious transfers, all of which lined up perfectly with Malachi's recollections, making the jury stare at the boy with awe, bordering on disbelief. But the tension rose when the prosecutor asked Malachi how he recognized Hayes' voice months later, and Malachi explained the moment that changed everything. He had been watching a televised committee hearing with his grandfather, who loved politics, and when Hayes began speaking, Malachi froze mid-bite of cereal, his heart pounding because the voice on TV was the same voice from the train yard, the same tone, cadence, rhythm, even the exact throat-clearing sound he heard behind the crates that night. His mother had panicked when he told her, begging him not to say a word to anyone. But Malachi insisted that truth mattered more than fear, that letting dangerous people stay in power would only make things worse. And though she cried, she eventually realized her son was right. The courtroom sat frozen as the prosecutor asked whether Malachi feared retaliation, and he answered honestly that he did, but fear wasn't enough to make him lie or stay silent. The judge exhaled slowly, visibly shaken by the boy's courage. But before anyone could speak again, a sudden violent bang echoed outside the courtroom doors, making everyone jump, and marshals rushed to secure the entrance as panicked whispers filled the room. Moments later, the lead marshal returned, explaining that someone had attempted to force entry but had been apprehended, likely connected to Hayes or Draper's circle. A wave of dread pulsed through the gallery, but Malachi remained still, his face pale but determined. The prosecutor gently asked if he needed a break, but the boy shook his head, whispering, "If I stop now, they win." And so he continued, describing the last piece of the puzzle, the coded ledger he saw in Draper's hands that night, filled with strange abbreviations and dollar amounts, which he later realized corresponded to school districts and program codes, proving the stolen funds came from public education budgets. Hayes had forced Draper to keep the ledger hidden, but after the confrontation at the train yard, Draper panicked and moved it, a mistake that later allowed investigators to find it once they knew where to look. After Malachi testified, the courtroom gasped again as the prosecutor revealed they had recovered the ledger early that morning, only hours after Malachi mentioned it in part 1 of his testimony. Draper's face crumbled in defeat. Hayes looked hollow and furious, and Knox, still in chains, glared with hatred as if willing the child to disappear. But the evidence was overwhelming now, and Malachi's courage had given prosecutors everything they needed to pursue full charges. As the judge prepared to adjourn for the day, Malachi turned toward the camera once again, sensing thousands were watching the live broadcast, and with the same brave calmness that stunned the world, he said, "If you're watching this, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Truth should reach farther than fear." And with that, Part 2 ended, leaving the nation breathless for the final chapter. The courtroom was electric with tension, the kind of charged silence that made every whisper feel like thunder, as Malachi climbed back onto the witness stand, escorted by 2 federal marshals whose eyes darted constantly toward the doors, scanning for threats because the revelations of the past 2 days had placed the 80-year-old squarely at the center of a storm far bigger than anyone had anticipated, a storm that included corrupt officials, violent enforcers, and a shadowy mastermind whose name alone had made the jury and judge recoil in disbelief. Yet Malachi sat calmly, his small frame tense but unshaken, feet dangling, hands gripping the wooden rail, eyes scanning the room as if measuring every heartbeat, every twitch, every nervous glance, because he knew the most dangerous moment was not revealing the truth, but watching whether those who wielded power could accept it or attempt to silence him. The judge, pale and shaken, called the courtroom to order, his gavel striking with more urgency than authority. As the jury leaned forward, their notebooks forgotten, all attention on the boy who had appended the legal system with nothing more than memory, courage, and an unshakable sense of justice. Malachi began to recount the events that followed the fateful night at the train yard, the shadowy SUV that had tailed his mother and him through city streets, the anonymous letters warning them to forget what they saw, the cold voice on the other end of a phone call that left his mother in tears, the sense of eyes watching from every corner, and how he had secretly documented everything in meticulous notes, memorized law books and procedure manuals, and rehearsed his testimony over and over, because he knew the truth was more dangerous than any threat. The prosecutor guided him carefully, letting him speak without interruption, and as Malachi explained how he had pieced together the coded ledger, connecting Draper's hidden financial accounts to stolen education funds and public grants, the courtroom grew increasingly tense. Jurors exchanged wide-eyed glances, reporters scribbled frantically, and even the defense attorneys looked like they were grappling with disbelief, trying to maintain composure as the boy, with the precision of a seasoned investigator, described how every word, gesture, and decision of Hayes and Draper had been documented in his memory. The air seemed to hum as he described the conversations between Draper and Knox. Their threats, their code words, the exact phrases that proved collusion, and the subtle signals that revealed Hayes' orchestration from the shadows. And the room seemed to shrink with every detail, each revelation heavier than the last, leaving jurors frozen, spectators speechless, and the judge gripping the armrest in disbelief. Then came the moment that transformed tension into outright panic. Malachi revealed that not only had he witnessed the crimes firsthand, he had secretly recovered a digital recorder that Knox had dropped while smashing crates in the warehouse, hidden under splintered wood until he could safely retrieve it. And although the device was cracked, the memory card was intact, containing audio of Draper, Knox, and Hayes discussing their schemes in full, leaving the prosecution with undeniable evidence that validated every word the boy had spoken. As the prosecutor held the small recorder up for everyone to see, whispers rippled through the courtroom. The defense attorney paled, Draper's jaw tightened, and Knox's eyes blazed with fury as he realized the game was over. But Malachi remained composed, his calm determination a shield against the storm of danger swirling around him. The judge, regaining some semblance of control, ordered the audio immediately analyzed, instructing marshals to secure the courtroom as everyone waited, the tension so thick it felt like it could be sliced with a knife. And Malachi's mother could only hold his hand tightly, her tears mixing relief with fear because the moment of truth carried risks she could hardly comprehend. Hours passed as experts reviewed the recordings, financial records, and corroborating evidence Malachi had helped locate, each confirmation tightening the noose around Draper, Hayes, and Knox, leaving the defense scrambling in vain, their objections weak and trembling under the weight of incontrovertible proof. The jury watched in awe, leaning forward as though closer proximity could allow them to absorb some of the boy's clarity, jurors' hands gripping their notebooks, eyes wide with disbelief and respect, recognizing that the entire case, which had seemed impenetrable to seasoned investigators, was now laid bare by the intellect and bravery of one child. Tension peaked when Knox attempted to lunge from his chair, shouting threats, prompting marshals to restrain him. Yet Malachi did not flinch. The boy's gaze remained steady, resolute, his voice calm as he described the ledger's codes, the correspondence linking Hayes to public funds, and the subtle gestures that revealed the full scope of the conspiracy, each word stripping away layers of deceit with surgical precision. The courtroom was on edge, the air thick with anticipation, the walls themselves seeming to hold their breath as Malachi explained how Draper had moved the ledger in panic, unaware that the boy had memorized every detail and would provide directions to its hidden location, ensuring that no attempt at destruction could succeed. Reporters outside continued their frenzy, cameras flashing, hashtags trending, while inside, jurors, attorneys, and the judge witnessed a historic moment, an HROW controlling the narrative of a multi-million-dollar corruption case with insight, courage, and unshakable logic, forcing even seasoned adults to step back and acknowledge the power of truth, memory, and unwavering moral conviction. When the evidence was finally presented, analyzed, and confirmed, the prosecution laid out their final argument, systematically detailing the crimes, corroborating every point with recordings, financial trails, and eyewitness testimony, all centered on the child who had become the unlikely fulcrum of justice. Leaving the courtroom silent in the gravity of what was at stake, Draper's shoulders slumped, Hayes' face drained of color, Knox's anger simmered impotently, and the judge's voice trembled as he explained the next steps, all the while casting furtive glances at Malachi, who sat quietly, his hands folded, his small frame radiating a composed confidence that seemed impossible for his age. After deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict of guilty on all counts, and the room erupted into a mixture of relief, sobs, and muted applause. The magnitude of the child's bravery sinking in for everyone present. Federal agents escorted the convicted parties away. Reporters scrambled to broadcast every detail, and viewers around the world witnessed a legal history being written, one that proved courage and intelligence were not measured by age or size, but by the clarity of conviction and the willingness to face danger in pursuit of truth. As the courtroom settled, Malachi's mother finally allowed herself a long, shuddering breath, tears flowing freely as she hugged her son, realizing that he had changed the course of lives and institutions forever, and the judge, still in awe, acknowledged publicly that Malachi had demonstrated a mastery and courage that few adults could ever achieve. And before the cameras could fade from the courtroom, Malachi turned once more to the lens streaming live to thousands across the globe, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering, and said, "Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and share because truth travels farther than fear, and every voice matters." The moment lingered, a perfect ending to a storm of suspense, courage, and intellect that would be remembered long after the doors of the courthouse closed, and the echoes of justice settled into history.